Hello, this is Tamara with the Knitting Lab, and I thought I would put together a special video to help you, those of you who are going to be taking the sock class in January, to prepare for your class. I will follow up with a hard copy of your supplies, but I thought it would be really helpful for you to get a little more understanding of why you need what supply. And also, this would help you get an idea of what type of socks you want to make, and that would tell you what kind of yarn you need. So, I'm going to start by putting out the supply list for you. The supply list, as you can see, says to make one pair of socks, you need yarn, 100 grams, that's a weight, and it says the yardage depends on the yarn weight. And then for needles, you'll need a long circular needle, preferably 40 inches, that's the length from tip of the needle to tip of the needle, with a minimum length of a 32-inch minimum. 32-inch needle, which means if you already have a 32-inch circular length needle in the size needle tip that you need, you can use that and see if that works for you. And that's fine, and you don't need to go and buy a 40-inch. But if you don't have one and you're going to buy one, you might consider buying the larger of the two. And you'll be able to use this for the technique we're using for any time you're doing a small circumference, as well as making any kind of shawl or anything that needs a longer straight needle. So now let me talk about why I'm talking about grams to you. So let's talk about yarn. What you have here is a delicious, colorful assortment of sock yarn. You might hear a lot of talking about sock yarn, different kinds of sock yarn. I think that sock yarn is really a favorite of independent dyers to work on because it's a relatively small amount that yields high yardage. So when I talk about a weight, when I talk about 100 grams of yarn, I want you to know that 100 grams of thin yarn is going to give you a lot more yardage than 100 grams of a thicker weight yarn. So, and actually this is not 100 grams, this is 50 grams. These are all considered sock yarns. And everything I have here, with one exception, are all dyed yarns. They're all interesting, funky type of hand dyes. Some of them will end up producing stripes in a product, in the finished product. Some of them will just be colorful. There might be some tonal variations. And some will be really maybe speckled. And then there's yarn that's dyed, but it's not dyed by an independent dyer, and tons of companies make dyed yarn. This is Knit Picks, and this Knit Picks product is sold in 50-gram balls. And here it says 50 grams. And for each 50 grams, there's 231 yards. Because the thinner, let me get that in focus, there. The thinner the yarn, the more yardage there is in that weight. So now let's talk about the sock and why I'm talking about yarn grams versus yardage. If you've made socks before and you're comfortable working in a very small tube with a skinny needle, then absolutely you might want to get some sock yarn and a set of needles that go with the sock yarn. Sock yarn, this thickness of sock yarn, often use needles in a size 0 or a 1 or a 2. And here's an example of a US 1 needle. This is a 2.5 millimeter needle, and the US size is 1. And this is what you might be knitting a pair of socks on with this thickness of yarn. And as I've said, if you're comfortable because you've either done a sock project or you've worked with this weight of yarn on really little needles, then absolutely you can go for it. Get 2 skeins or 100 grams, whether that's one big Hank, or 2 balls, go ahead and get the yarn and get this little needle, and you'll be working with this for your socks. However, I would like you to consider working with some thicker yarn for your very first sock project. These dark holiday colors aren't showing up that great, but how about these babies? So you might notice these are all the same yarn because I have it on hand, because this is the yarn I might use for a color work hat, like that. So this is a hat with worsted weight yarn, and this is using probably a size US 7 needle, and a size 7, 8, or 9 needle is what we typically use for this weight of yarn. However, let's say you want to make yourself a pair of cozy socks that you're going to wear around the house, or you're going to wear in a cabin, you're going to wear them like slippers. This is a perfect yarn for you to work on for your first sock. Now these, in particular, this wool of the Andes is also sold in 50-gram balls, but the yardage for these 50 grams is only 110 yards compared to 50 grams of sock yarn, which gives you 231 yards. So that's why I'm talking to you about how many yards you'll need of yarn. It all depends on what weight of yarn you use, but I would tell you that if you follow what we're going to do in class and not make a very tall sock, meaning not a lot of leg, I believe that 100 grams total for the 2 socks is going to be plenty. And I'm giving you the yardage amounts for you to make a pair, by the way. So now let's talk more about the difference in these 2 sock weights. What is considered typically sock yarn, we'll go back to these beauties. Sock yarn is the same weight as fingering weight yarn, but what distinguishes sock yarn typically is it has a pretty tight twist. So the yarn is plied, and the plies are usually pretty nicely twisted. So these all have some twist to them. This guy has a softer twist, I'd say. The other thing that's distinctive is sock yarn almost always contains a small amount of a synthetic fiber like nylon. So everything here probably has at least 20% nylon in it. And having the nylon in the sock yarn gives it increased durability. So here we have 80% superwash fine Highland wool and 20% polyamide, which is again another nylon-like thread. So these yarns with the tight twist will give a lot of durability because there's nothing that has as much wear and tear as something that's on the bottom of your foot in your shoe. Lots of friction. So the tight twist combined with the nylon or the polyamide fiber is going to help combat the friction and be more durable. But let's say you're working with us for making a sock for the first time. You've never worked in a small circumference. I invite you to consider making a sock with a worsted weight yarn. So if you do that though, you are going to use a needle that's not quite as skinny as the sock yarn needle, but it's still going to be thicker. It's still going to be smaller than what you normally use for this weight yarn. So for a worsted weight, like I said, we might do a 7, 8, or 9 needle. This guy tells you usually a 6, 7, or 8, 9 needle. But where we would do this, we would use this sock yarn and work on maybe a 4 needle. So now I'm going to show you what that looks like knit up. Here is a sock worked on a number 0. Let's get that up. Here we go. Here's a sock worked up with skinny little needles. These needles are considered a size 0. And I can tell you that a size 0 needle is a 2 millimeter needle. So that's the millimeter. Here's the size 0. And the length of the needle is 40 inches long. The reason we need the needle to be so long is because we're going to use a technique called a magic loop, and we're going to work this whole sock on this one long circular needle. And here's what it looks like. The sock is basically worked in half, with half of the work on one side of the needle and the other half on the other side of the needle. So the sock is knit flat, worked like this, one half at a time, and these loops stick out. That is a sock knit with sock weight yarn, and this is about 7 to 8 stitches in 1 inch. So I'm going to hold that up. So these little stitches are about 8 of them in one. Here we go. 8 of them in 1 inch. Now I'm going to show you what it would look like if you knit the same size sock with worsted weight yarn. Now, unfortunately, the color I picked, this dark green that I had in the holiday spirit, is pretty hard for my camera to pick up. So you're going to have to bear with me. I'm going to hold this up. I'm trying to see if, oh, there we go. You can see a bit. So this sock is knit with 6 stitches fitting in 1 inch. And what this means for you, there we go, that's beautiful. How about that? See those beautiful stitches? So 6 of them fit in 1 inch, which means if I want to make the same size sock, I can cast on far fewer stitches in this bad boy than in this one. The purple and black striped sock is knit with 60 stitches. There, nice focus. 60 stitches for this guy. This is knit with 48 stitches. So I have 24 on the first half, and I have 24 in the second half. So as a first-time sock knitter, this might be the way to go because you are working with less stitches. You're going to move through it a little faster. But probably most importantly, you're going to be able to work and learn this new technique while you're using a needle that's much larger and maybe easier for you to handle for the first time than one of these little guys. Okay, this is a US 0 needle, and this is a US 4 needle. You might even have a long US 4 from working on a shawl. These are the 2 different needles, and these are the 2 different socks. And just remember, as I usually tell you, this is not the only time you're going to make this project. You know, when I tell you you're making a hat, it's the first hat. So I'd like you to think that this is the first pair of socks you're making. And I will provide sizing for you, regardless of if you're doing the sock weight or if you're doing a worsted weight. But I'm just going to show you this guy. He's really cute. No, I'm not going to wear my sock on my wrist. Probably not. You never know. But I want you to see that this is a really nice fabric, knit densely, and it would be perfectly cozy for you to wear this around the house, especially now in the winter. Okay, so I hope that's really helpful information for you to consider. And remember that regardless of the size, you're going to want to get 100 grams of yarn, 100 grams of yarn, whether it's 2 50-gram balls or a big giant thing of yarn. And you're going to need a long circular needle, at least 32 inches long, and if you're getting a new one, maybe a 40-inch long. That 40-inch long, though, is going to give you a big cable loop sticking out of your work. And the last thing I want to tell you is this is not the time to use a super slippery, soft yarn. Even if you're not using a sock yarn, if you're doing the worsted yarn, I really would use something that's pretty firm. And this has a good twist. And there's no nylon on this. This is the wool of the Andes. This is a Knit Picks product that's 100% Peruvian Highland wool. Highland wool is a much more rugged, heavy-duty wool, firmer than a merino. You don't want to use cashmere right now. I mean, hey, if that's what you got around, lucky you, but it's going to wear much quicker than something more rugged. So a Peruvian Highland wool is going to be great for if you're doing something for like for a pair of slipper socks, or socks that maybe you're going to wear a pair of boots you're going to wear in a pair of boots. All right, that's it. Thanks for so much, and I'll be coming back in the next couple weeks with some technique videos to give you a jump start. Take care, guys. Happy holidays.